turn now to Naomi Klein, the best-selling author of No Logo, whose new book is called The Shock Doctrine, The Rise of Disaster Capitalism. Thanks for coming in tonight.
Glad to be here.
Explain this basic premise, if you can.
Well, the basic premise is that these are very unpopular policies, that people tend to protect their labor protections, their social programs. They don't actually want to hand their democracies over to multinational corporations. And so you need some kind of a shock. And that shock could be a war, it could be an economic meltdown, it could be a terrorist attack, but something that creates a period of confusion, of dislocation, of regression, and then politicians come forward playing the sort of father figure. If this reminds you of anything, let me know. And use that period of dislocation to push through policies in a state of emergency that they wouldn't be able to do otherwise. And in this country, obviously, the shock of September 11th was used to privatize the U.S. military, to privatize the government, to create this hollow infrastructure of a government that is the Bush specialty.
And in Iraq, the mess that we saw there, was that the result of no planning, or was it the desired result of a bad plan?
Well, Iraq is the classic example of the shock doctrine. You had a military strategy that was called shock and awe. It was a military strategy designed to maximize disorientation. And the theory was, and this is a quote from Richard Armitage, the former Deputy Secretary of State, Undersecretary of State, who said that the theory was that Iraqis would be so shocked they would be easily marshaled from point A to point B. And so in that moment, when they were supposed to be easy to control, easy to marshal, you had Paul Bremer waltz in his Brooks Brothers suits and army boots, the uniform of the disaster capitalists, and say Iraq is open for business, and create this sort of an attempt to create a kind of a corporate utopia for American multinationals. It didn't work out. And then you saw the emergence of a third shock. Not an economic shock, but shocks to bodies, the shock of torture, as they attempted to control this rebellious country. So there's three kinds of shocks in the shock doctrine: the shock of the crisis, then an economic shock therapy program, and then, if people don't behave, a third shock, which is the shock of torture.
Did the Iraqis speak up about this attempt to privatize their country when Bremer started this?
They absolutely spoke up about it. I mean, I was in Iraq in that first year reporting for Harper's Magazine. I met a worker at a vegetable oil company, one of the largest state-owned factories. He said that they were so opposed to privatizing that company that there were two choices, that they would either burn it to the ground or they would blow themselves up inside it. I mean, that was the level of determination against these policies, because what Iraqis saw was that this was a continuation of the war. That's the way it was perceived. There is a word for what happens when you invade a country, especially on false pretenses, and then you grab its assets. It's called looting, right? And it's illegal. And Iraqis responded as if their country was being looted, not as if it was being restructured or developed or reconstructed, or any of the cleansed words that was used to describe this.
It was a corporate takeover with guns.
Yeah, armed robbery.
And if it's a corporate takeover with guns, your argument is that awareness of the pattern and seeing where it's played out around the world and what this country has had to do with it, that's the key to stopping it?
Well, exactly. I mean, think about September 11th, that state of disorientation. Now we look back on it and we realize how much we lost in that moment, and we're only piecing it together in this sort of forensic accounting, which happens through scandal, right? There's a Blackwater scandal, and then we find out how much this one company has expanded its reach, or the Abu Ghraib scandal breaks, and we find out, okay, there's private companies doing prison interrogation, right? It's all retroactive. It's all back accounting. If we understand how our states of shock are exploited, if we can recognize the signs, then the next time there is a crisis, and it can be an economic crisis. I think that, and it's really relevant. And one of the things I do in the book is I show this 35-year history, and in much of that history, it was economic crises that played that enabling role, and it is just as anti-democratic. But when the next shock hits, we can prepare. I have a quote in the book, as you know, from Milton Friedman, who says that only a crisis, actual or perceived, produces real change. And he says when the crisis hits, the change depends on the ideas that are lying around. So it's not just about recognizing the patterns, it's also about having your ideas lying around when the next shock hits.
Well, we'll see. If we do slide into recession, maybe that's the one that they're looking for next. Naomi Klein, the book is Shock Doctrine. Congratulations on it, and great thanks for coming in.
Thank you.